and welcome to this summer special edition of The Ring, Euronews's weekly debate show. I'm Maeve McMahon. On The Ring, members of the European Parliament go face-to-face on some of the most pressing issues of our time. As they take a break from the city for the summer recess, we're playing you some of the highlights of this season. With the war in Ukraine featuring heavy and the EU and EU member states investing billions in defence, the big question that we put to members of the European Parliament is how much should we spend on defence and who should foot the bill? To set the scene, we can take a look at an excerpt of this edition between Rio Terras, a former army general from Estonia, and Martin Schurden, a left MEP from Germany.
I think we are derailing the discussion here. It's not about to spend money on healthcare systems or defense. It's about defending Europe, because we see that an aggressive Russia is willing and able to use conventional military weapons against countries. And Putin has very often declared that he wants to rearrange the security system in Europe. And if we are not ready, if we don't fulfill our own taken tasks, then we are not able to defend Europe as a whole and separate countries of it.
And Martin Schurden, that is a fair point, what Rio Terras makes there, because just think of Brussels. Just the other day, the airport was shut down for 30 minutes because of drone incursions, allegedly Russian drone incursions, buzzing over Doel, the nuclear plant right by the port of Antwerp. Brussels had to call the UK in order to come and help. It wasn't able to defend itself in this situation.
Yeah, exactly. That was supposedly a Russian drone. We don't know that yet. But I'm not defending Russia here. Maybe it was Russia, maybe it was the third country, maybe it was a privateer, who knows. But obviously Europe is tested, also in its military capabilities. So, of course, we need to do something in order to discuss how to defend the European Union, how to defend the member states in case there would be a violation of international law, meaning an attack against one of the member states. This is not the case so far, so we can take time, but just a little bit to discuss how to spend wisely the money that we have at our hands into defense. And a new security order does not only depend on defense capabilities, it also depends on how we implement international law, how we strengthen international organizations. And this is something that I'm really missing, especially in the discussion of the Conservatives.
How much to spend and where to spend it. Money, of course, one of the major points of discussion on that episode of The Ring. Defence came up in another fascinating, lively debate on The Ring that we had between the Austrian MEP from the European People's Party, Lucas Mandl, and the Belgian MEP from the left, Mark Botenga. Take a look.
First of all, I don't think the massive increase is justified. Let's say this first. Secondly, I think it actually will weaken Europe on the long term as well, because contrary to what you're saying, it is not a good idea for our industry. You know, we have, you speak about jobs. Basically, the defense industry yields less jobs for money invested than other sectors do. You will not save the steel industry with militarization. You know, producing 1,000 tanks, it's about 3 days of production of a steel factory. So you can see that you're actually weakening also. There's a negative multiplier effect that might be applied to other industries. So you're weakening structurally the industrial base of Europe by saying we put more defense, but we will lose other sectors. Look at the automobile sector. And secondly, indeed, what is the threat that justifies, you know, this massive? Why, for example, if I hear the German chancellor, right, saying, I want to have the biggest army in Europe. Why do you want the biggest army in Europe? Is that your threat assessment? That the problem is you don't have the biggest army in Europe? We need to be very clear. There are threats, you know, and one of the threats is the arms race. One of the threats is nuclear war. Yeah. Let's be very clear. This is very clear. How do you deal with that? During the Cold War, we knew disarmament, transparency, limitations on arms control systems. All of these things we knew during the Cold War with the Soviet Union that was vastly more powerful and vastly more ideological than Putin or Putin's Russia will ever be.
Okay. Do you hear this?
In the Cold War, freedom won against dictatorship. And this was, of course, due to deterrence. And deterrence is what is needed. Deterrence will also save us. And deterrence is only possible if we can take care of ourselves. And the security sector and industries is not isolated from other sectors. We have to understand Europe, and I really care for Europe's prosperity, for jobs on our continent and for the future of the generations ahead. Europe became a continent of consumption. We have been consuming over decades innovation from America, production from China and other parts of Asia, also innovation from China in the meantime. So we need innovation on European soil. We also need production on European soil. And when you talk about the automotive sector, there are not many sectors as much connected to the security sector as this one. So security and economy has to be taken serious. That's why I'm also saying let's put first things first. This must be the priority.
Now it's time for our viewers to get a real flavor of the European Parliament chamber, where members ask each other questions. And sometimes it can get heated. So let's get started. Lucas Mandl, I'm going to ask you to ask the first question to Mark.
Well, Mark Botenga, as a colleague in the European Parliament, how can we make sure that we establish more freedom for the Europeans to the inside and more strength to the outside? This is the overall issue of our time. I would say Europe needs more strength for its civilization, for its reliability, the diplomatic approach that you obviously do not see from the European side, while Europe is the strongest diplomatic power given the geopolitical situation today. So how can we create more strength to the outside, and how can we establish more freedom to the inside for our citizens?
I think that's a very interesting question coming from the center-right, who's governing in many governments in Europe, and who's basically limiting the right to protest, who's limiting the right to strike, who's limiting basically fundamental freedoms of Europeans. And so I would say, first thing, please tell the governments of your political group, of your political party, to stop limiting the fundamental freedoms of Europeans. And secondly, towards the outside, we need, I think, to rebuild European credibility. And how do we do that? We do that by stopping the double standards, by no longer saying international law is important for us in Ukraine, but in Palestine we don't care. International law is important when Russia or Putin violates it, but we don't care when Trump violates international law. Because if you have these double standards, never ever will other countries take you seriously, and never ever will you be a decent player on the international scale.
Okay, on this, I think you want to follow up.
I mean, there is so much to be said. I think it was now the fourth or fifth conspiracy theory from Mr. Botenga in today's talk about freedom being limited in Europe. There is no part on this planet, no continent, no country where freedom is so much established and so much defended and strong as it is in Europe. Obviously, also that we have this debate today, also that extremists have all democratic rights in parliaments in Europe, including the very European Parliament. All of this is about freedom. And then mixing things up doesn't make it better. Of course, when international law is violated, Europe is the strongest voice speaking about that. Europe stood strong against Trump's attempt, for example, when it comes to Greenland, and we succeeded in that area. Mm-hmm. Europe stood strong when it was not clear whether the tariffs will go that way or the other way from Trump's side. He put us in a limbo again, but we didn't follow this pathway of a limbo. We didn't enter this political battlefield of Trump. We stood strong, and we managed to succeed more when it comes to the geopolitical tensions given than other parts of the world. But of course, we need more strength to the outside, especially in that field you are doubting, in the field of our own security, right, and Mark, being able to take care of it.
Mark, you want to react? And then your question to Lucas Mandl.
Well, I think it's interesting because very often the EPP and centre parties, when they don't have an answer, they say this is a conspiracy theory. What we see in many countries, like in Germany now, there's a debate even on saying we can't use the watermelon anymore as a political symbol because it would be anti-Semitic. This is, what we are seeing. We're seeing this also with action against trade unions in different countries. So we see that there's a democratic backsliding, which human rights organizations are pointing out in Europe. It's not some kind of left conspiracy to say that. But you don't want to see it because it's your governments doing it. Secondly, what I indeed want to ask now, and I think that's a thing. You say that Europe stands up for international law, and you quote Greenland. Europe didn't stand up for international law in Greenland. It stood up for its own territorial integrity. That is something very different. Because when we had to stand up for international law, the illegal war on Iran, you supported it yourself. When it is about denouncing the illegal occupation of Lebanon by Israel, you support it. When the International Court of Justice says that we should sanction Israel as third parties, we have a responsibility, you refuse it. So basically, when the Venezuelan president, whatever we think of him, is kidnapped illegally, and the world globally condemns this, saying this is just absolutely not how we deal with, how would I say, with international relations, and this is a violation of the UN Charter, you support it. So this is the issue. These double standards, it's not Europe that has double standards, you know. It is you, it is the governing coalition of Europe that has these double standards.
Look, who is dealing with international law, who is in the lead of preserving it and observing it as the United Nations. We had yesterday night in the European Parliament's plenary a debate on the United Nations necessary reform. United Nations have to be reformed for obvious reasons, and if you are telling now that the war on the Iranian regime was wrong, I say, yeah, it was amateurishly done by the United States, while the decapitation of the Mullah regime's leaders worked very well. But the war obviously was wrong because it didn't work out well. The Mullah regime is still in place. I've been sanctioned myself by the Mullah regime since 2023, so I know what I'm talking about when I say women are suppressed in Iran. Iran is threatening the whole world, not only the region, and of course to threaten our only partner country in the region, the only democracy, the only rule of law-based state in the region, Israel, is part of the conspiracy theories of your political side. And this is a sign of freedom in Europe, that you can speak freely about that, even if it's a very much in minority being opinion, but you're allowed to say that, and there's no many parts on earth where you can do that. And last point on Greenland, I mean, when international law is violated, it doesn't matter whether it's Europe's interest or the ours interest. We care for international law. We even want to save international law during these geopolitical times of tensions, and that means that we have to reform the United Nations.
Okay, thank you for a great debate so far. We've heard your views. Now it's time to hear from a new voice. And for our quote of the week, I would like to bring in Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. In a letter addressed to Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, she said this: "We cannot justify to our citizens that the EU allows financial flexibility to be used for security and defense purposes in the strictest sense, but not to protect families, workers and enterprises from a new energy crisis that threatens to severely impact the real economy." Your take on this, Mark?
Well, two things. First, she's walked back on that statement. Secondly, it's terribly hypocritical, because the fact that we now have, again, these horrible austerity rules was approved by her government. So first, and this is fantastic, first the far right approves this, or the center right, whatever you want to call her, approves these rules, and then they say, it's not fair. So this is, pure populism. But what is true is that Europe today says there's no money for your hospitals, for your pensions, for your schools, but miraculously, we find hundreds of billions for the defense multinationals. This contradiction is real. And so, indeed, we do not need these austerity rules anymore. And once again, they've been imposed by the mainstream parties, including Giorgia Meloni's.
Okay, Lucas Mandl, your reaction?
Yeah, this is part of the extremist populist approach. I think also the consumers, viewers of this program should see that there's no contradiction between producing something on European soil instead from buying it from outside, and having hospitals and schools and streets, because the one thing is connected with the other. If we have strong prosperity, if we have growth finally in Europe again, we will also be able to afford the social welfare states we have established, generations before us have established in Europe, and we will have schools and roads.
And another major issue that dominated the European news agenda this year was the war in Iran and the impact it's having on the European Union and also on our economies. We had a lively debate between the Spanish MEP from the Socialists, Hanna Khalul, and the Austrian MEP from the European People's Party, Reinhard Lopatka.
As you know, and as my Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, have stated, we think that any unilateral military intervention that have not passed through the Security Council of the United Nations is not in compliance with international law. So we condemn any unilateral attack. This is not to say that we are supporting the Iranian regime in any case, because we have been against the Iranian regime, criticizing the killing of Masha Amini and, the protesters, in the streets that were fighting for human rights. and their liberties. And we have always condemned the relation of the Iranian regime with the militias such as Hezbollah or the Houthis or Hamas. So very critical with them always. And we fought to include the Revolutionary Guard in the EU terrorist list.
So a condemnation of the Iranian regime, but also of the US-Israeli intervention. Mr. Lopatka, do you think that this military intervention from the US and Israel was justified?
I can't agree. Why? Because if we would wait until the Security Council of the United Nations is acting, we would never have a result. You know, it is blocked by Russia and China. They always support Iran, whatever is ongoing there. So don't forget, this regime in Iran, the Mullah regime, is a terrorist regime. What did they do? They killed thousands of their own people. There was state oppression to the Kurds. There are 8 million Kurds. Have in mind how they killed Masha Amini some years ago. They are founding terrorist groups in the region, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. And they are a big danger also for Europe. We should not forget it. It was a diplomat, he was in Vienna, in our embassy. Then he was sentenced here in Belgium for 20 years because he was supporting terrorism here on European soil. So what I want to say is, we can speak about international law, and here you can say maybe it was illegal, but I think the United States and Israel were legitimized to start with these strikes.
So let me put that argument to you, MEP Lalul. He's saying, well, maybe the legality is questionable, but isn't Europe letting the US and Israel do its dirty work in the Middle East by going after the proxies, going after the nuclear and missile programs of Tehran, for example? Do you agree with that?
Well, what I do think is that we have diplomacy for something. First of all, we cannot use double standards. We cannot criticize other aggressions, of other countries, and then say that this is something we can. But this is about international law, the system that we gave to ourselves after 45. So either we believe in international law or we don't believe in that. And we have means like diplomacy. Let's remember that one day before the conflict, even the Iranians sitting in a table of negotiations with the Omanis said that they will work not to enrich themselves. We know that, and we have investigating, and we sent inspectors in order to see that they were enriching. And even if the director of the nuclear agency said a few days ago that they were not sure that they were building nuclear weapons, but they had more than 60% of the allowed enrichment of uranium. So we have been very critical of that. We were under control, but don't forget that we have also a deal in 2015 between Iran and 6 other countries where the US were within that countries, even Russia and China. And then the US unilaterally deployed afterwards, which had as a consequence Iran enriching much more and restricting more of the inspections. So either we have all a consensus against Iran on diplomacy, fighting the enrichment on uranium, and targeting any other kind of activities they can have outside, or, it cannot be unilateral. We need to go all together and based on international base rule system.
You bring up this question of double standards because the EU does pride itself on upholding the rules-based order, international law. You said yourself that you question the legality of this, yet the EU always is talking about international law in places like Ukraine. Isn't this double standards from the EU?
No, not at all. Why? There's a big difference between the invasion in Ukraine of Russia to take the country, not respecting the sovereignty, not at all. And the situation here, the UN Charter, and I'm absolutely sure that the purpose of it is to protect human life and not to shield terrorist regimes like in Iran. The Security Council is not working, so we are in a very difficult situation. Because I think the bigger threat is when the Security Council is misused by regimes like Iran, by dictators like Putin. And on the other side, we have to do everything to protect the interest of our people. And fighting terrorism, and Iran is the biggest sponsor of terrorism, giving Israel the chance to survive as a nation, I think this is our duty, and it's absolutely in the interest of Europe. So there's a big difference and no double standards, not at all.
As you can see there, lots of questions, but really hard to find the answers. Now it's time for us to take a short break here on this special summer edition of The Ring. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back soon. Welcome back to this special summer edition of Euronews debate show, The Ring. I'm Maeve McMahon in Brussels. And as MEPs take a break from the city for the summer and the activities in the European Parliament institution behind me take a slow, we're looking back at some of the highlights of this season on The Ring. One topic that featured a lot was, of course, the war in Iran and how Europe should respond. We can take a look now at an excerpt from this edition between Rio Terres, the Estonian European People's Party MEP, with Osmo Demirel, a far-left MEP from Germany.
We have seen wars emerge around us. Europe has not launched any wars. Europe has not, in the last 70 years, not been part to a war itself, but we see others attacking European countries around us. Do you think that Europe can solve these problems diplomatically, or do we need military means to back up our diplomatic efforts? And if not, what is the other way?
To be honest, yes, the European Union as European Union didn't launch wars. But European member states were also in the past part of wars, like we saw in Afghanistan, like we saw in Iraq, like we saw in Libya. It was not, UK is not anymore European Union, but it was also European countries. So it's not true that the European Union in the past was just standing for diplomacy and against wars in this world. So if we want to answer the times of wars, we have to go back and to stop about talking just about militarization.
Do you know the definition of a dialogue?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, that means that it needs two parts who want to discuss, to talk to each other. If one side wants to talk and the other one is not, and I have been experiencing myself trying to reach out to Russian chief of defense as I was chief of defense, and the response was, why? Nobody wants to talk to us. And not dictator Putin, not Chairman Xi, they don't care. And as long as we are weak, we are not at the table. And the dialogue needs two sides. And if Russia understands only military means, and they did not use diplomacy
maybe a reaction,
Ukraine.
Özlem, to that.
I don't know what you mean with weak. European Union is one of the huge or one of the biggest economic powers of the world. And also the European member states has a lot of military instruments, and we are spending a lot of money for military needs. So it's like this. The facts are on the table. So don't tell just we are like this or we are like this. What is happening by now is that the European Union also decided, like the US, like China, like other big powers in this world, that they want to defend its own interests, and this means resources of the world, trade routes of the world, by military means. And what this means is that people are dying, that the working class all over the world is paying the bill for it, and this is not acceptable. This is why I'm rejecting this military means, and I'm saying we have to find another way to protect lives, to protect our earth.
There are certain things we cannot do yet, that is the response to what we can or cannot do. So we need to invest commonly together to a drone defense, because we have seen a new weapon developing, a disruptive technology which has been used in Ukraine and kills people. We need, for example, to invest in this kind of technologies in order to make sure that our people are defended and they are not dying.
Let me say clearly, it's not a solution for nobody to prolong wars. And it's also like this, that not just Putin said, I don't want to negotiate. It was also like this, that the Western countries long time said we had no possibilities to negotiate. We don't want to negotiate. And this was prolonging this war. And the result of this war is not good for the Ukrainian people. So let me say this. You are from the EPP and you are standing for a conservative politics. You are, in the last weeks, your group has really weakened the right of asylum in European Union systems. And it's like this, that the war in Iran also has the result that people had to flee. that they become refugees and maybe they want to come here. What is your answer? Why are you supporting wars or not rejecting wars, not doing everything to stop wars, and on the other side working against people who are affected by these wars and become refugees? What is your answer on it?
May I start with saying EPP is not launching wars, is not causing wars, and the only thing EPP stands for is to defend people against the wars which are around us. Be it an Iran regime which has been killing, torturing people 47 years, or be it Russia, who has never listened to anybody, who launched wars since 2008, whose political aims are, who wants to achieve its political aims by military means.
And just on the potential refugee waves.
I'll come back to that. And so that is not what we want. And we want European people live safely in Europe. But we are ready to take refugees, but we don't want to have illegal refugees. We don't want to have economical refugees. We want to know who is living in Europe and who is not. And that's what we stand for.
It is now time to move on to our fifth and final round. Are you ready? So now it is time for something a little bit different. I'm going to be asking our MEPs a set of questions, and you only have the opportunity to answer with yes or no. So, was it a good idea to kill the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, yes or no?
I don't like him, but I don't think that it's illegal and it shouldn't be.
Was it a good idea, yes or no?
Yes.
Is the US still a friend to the European Union, yes or no?
Yes.
The US people, yes. Trump, no.
Should the EU be more involved in this war, yes or no?
Clearly no.
Yes.
And should European countries increase defence spending, yes or no?
Yes.
No.
Should Europe focus on renewable energy, yes or no?
Yes.
A manage mix.
Manage mix. And should NATO be involved if the conflict expands, yes or no?
No.
No, I'm against NATO also.
And just a question on European governments. Should European governments be subsidising energy costs today, now, to protect consumers, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
And is Iran a direct threat to European security?
No.
Yes, and it has always been.
OK, and have you agreed on anything that you've heard here? And what about you? Have you agreed?
I agree that renewable energy is a part of the energy mix.
And you can watch the full episode of that edition of The Ring on Euronews.com. But that does bring this special summer edition of The Ring to an end. We'll be back very soon. But in the meantime, do let us know what topics you want us to debate here. TheRing@Euronews.com. That is our email address. But for now, thanks for tuning in. Take care and see you soon on Euronews.